Hi, my name is Lorraine Watry and welcome to my studio. I am a watercolor artist and I've worked with watercolor for 26 years now, and I thought I would start a new series of videos where I go over different tips, tricks, and techniques for working with watercolor. And hopefully these short videos will help you in your journey, and if you have a question or a technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will try to accommodate that in a future video. Hi, today's video is going to go over how to create passages or areas of color without overlapping another area, or if you do, how you can adjust them. I had a viewer that was asking, is that just something that is learned over time? Is it, are there tips and tricks that you can do to adjust edges if you have overlapped them? And is it brush control? And it is kind of some of all of those things. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of information about brushes, and then I'll go on from there. So I have a variety of brushes in my bag, and my new favorites are, well, not new now, I've used them for several years now. They are the Silver Black Velvet series. And this series has a really good point to it. This is a number 20 brush. The smallest of those that I have out is a number 4, and you can see the difference in size. These brushes are made from synthetic and natural hair, so they hold a lot of water and pigment, but they have a really good point to them. So I can come down and do a really wide swatch of color, or I can do a narrow passage of color. So I think I'm going to go with Quin Rose, just because. Get some of that out. And so some of it is learning your brushes and playing with them and learning how you can come up on the tip if you need to, or go back down and create different edges. And then maybe make some shapes for yourself that you have to fill in, and just practice your brush control. And some of that comes over time with doing it enough that you get used to how your particular brush works for you. The other thing to talk about with brushes is that some brushes, no matter what you do, are just not going to have as good a point as others. So it can depend on the brush, but even when you have a brush that has a wider tip, I'll just use this because it's right there. This is Alvaro's Fresco Gray from Daniel Smith, and makes a really nice gray. And I can still come in with that and get a really nice shape and have control with it. This other brush that I have is from Cheap Joe's, and it is the, let's see, I believe it's their Master series. It's blend brush, so it also has synthetic and natural hairs, and it does have a semi-good point, but it doesn't come to as good a point as my Silver Black Velvet brush. So I will get some color out. I'm pulling out sap green, and I can then go in and do the same thing and make a circle, and it's just not going to maybe have as good a point and be as easy to work with, because it wants to go a little wider as I'm painting with it, whereas because of the way the bristles are made and how they're formed for this brush, it stays with a thinner, narrower tip. So some of it can be the brush. Another part might be just learning how much water and pigment you need on your brush, and if you are using paint that is really wet, how much it's going to flow off of your brush, or that kind of thing. The way that you can help yourself is that there are times where I know it's going to be hard to keep an edge as clean as I want it, and that's where you can, and I actually could have drawn something on there first, that's where you could come in, and I'm just going to make a quick tree trunk here. And by protecting the tree trunk with the masking tape, and this is, I've done a video with this, talking about this masking tape, but this is the Scotch brand number 2020 masking tape, and it is high adhesion, so it holds really well when you're working with watercolor, and then I just press it down really firmly. The other thing about it is that if I had drawn something first, so I'll just draw a simple shape here. I believe you can see that on the video, that you can see my line. So even if I draw with a lighter line, you should be able to see your line and see the masking tape so that you can see the shape to cut out. So I have a simple tree trunk here, and I'll just place some green around it. And by masking an area, you can protect your edges and then come back and paint whatever that object is once you've removed the mask. And that is a way to keep from accidentally going over an edge that you don't want to go over. So I'll just place some green on there real quick. Okay, and that would have to dry before I would remove the masking tape. So then the other way to mask, and many of you probably already know masking fluid, and I'll use the PBO for this. This is PBO drawing gum is what they call it. I actually, when I'm doing my paintings, use the Winsor and Newton colorless art masking fluid, and I like this because it doesn't add any color, so it doesn't affect what I'm seeing as I'm painting. And when you have some color in your masking fluid, sorry about my reach here, forgot to have this out, you are maybe seeing the colors on your paper a little differently because that mask makes a difference in what you're looking at. So I will just go up here and, whoops, I'm already making messes. Alright, I'll ignore that. Let's just go down here. Alright, so I'm going to go right here, and you can do very small things with masking fluid. So I could make branches if this was a tree. I could make leaves. Whoops, don't get it too full. Very quickly just add some leaves if I wanted to protect those. I will often mask things in my paintings that are the main subject and then paint the areas around it, doing the background first or some of the other things, and then come back and remove the mask. I also will use mask for protecting white areas or areas that are really small that it would be hard to paint around. So if you're working on something that you know it's going to be hard to paint around and you might end up overlapping edges, masking fluid or masking tape is a really good way to help yourself, and it does take a little bit of time to apply, but in the end it can really make a difference and make it easier for you to paint that area. So I would have to let this dry, and then once it was dry, then I could come back and paint the area around it. Okay, so I'm going to put this away, and then I'm going to pull out some paintings and show you some techniques that you could do if you have painted an area and it has overlapped. So let me move this. Alright, so I have a couple paintings here that I have done in the past. They're either color studies or demonstrations for something. So this one, I think you might be able to see that darker edge that ended up right here on this side of the block. And if I wanted to keep the color that color, I can try a couple things. So I have flat brushes in my brush holder that I keep to use to lift color. This is the Royal brand, and it's just a regular flat brush, probably for acrylics, mostly because it's a synthetic. And I could paint with it, but I don't use it for that. This is a number 4, and I have a number 2 and possibly somewhere other sizes in that brush. And then this brush is a Dynasty Fabric Flat. Let me see if I can hold it up so you can see that in the smaller camera. So this guy has stiffer bristles, and because it has stiffer bristles, it's going to lift a little easier maybe, or lift color that is not as easy to lift. So I usually start with the softer bristle brush and get it wet. And I'm actually going to zoom in with my camera, so I will pause the recording and I'll be right back so that you can see this a little closer up and see what I'm doing. Okay, I have zoomed in and I am going to work on this edge right here. Now it does depend on if you've used a paint that is staining or not. So just by using a little bit of water and gently coming over that edge, I can already start to adjust the edge a little bit. And I usually have a towel in my other hand so that I can dab up any pigment that I've moved. Now I don't necessarily have to get this edge perfect, but just removing that little bit of a darker line there, that makes it so that it's not as noticeable and it feels like it connects with the rest of that side better. So that is one line. I can even adjust the shape of an edge, so there's a little bit of a white area that didn't quite get filled with pigment right there, and I can sort of wake up that paint just a little bit right there and kind of get rid of that white point that was there just a touch, and plus I can straighten up this edge just a little bit. Now it's not going to necessarily be perfect like if you had filled it in exactly, but it does help straighten it up and it's not as noticeable. The other little point, let's see, right down here, down at the little swan, or actually it's an origami bird, I can clean that edge up just by coming in and lifting. So these colors are not staining colors. I believe I used, I think it was ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna, and did the whole painting in gray tones. And we were talking about values and all of that for this painting. And also I see an edge right here where it overlapped, and so I can come in and lift that way. Now if this color had been staining, then I would have to use a brush that would give me more pressure. So this one will lift some, but it's not going to give as much pressure on the paper, so it's not going to lift as a dark staining color as well. I think, I can't remember, but let me see if this is, first of all, I'll try it with this other brush. This color that's down here, I'm not sure if it's a staining pigment. It is a little harder to lift. So I will show you with this one if I was trying to lift this color and if it was overlapping something. This is going to be a little harder to lift right in here because the color is kind of blended in. I can try to come and gently, very gently use some water on the brush and try to get a little bit of that darker color out of there if I wanted to. If I wanted to lift a staining color, I think you can hear that on the video, this brush is going to give me more pressure and I can get more of that color to lift off. Now, it would depend on what you're doing because you may not want it to go back to the white of the paper. For over here, I wasn't trying to get down to the white of the paper. I was just wanting to get a little bit of that second layer that was on there removed so that it was more like the first layer in value. So let me pull this one off and I'll show you a different painting. For this one, there are some areas on the stems where my background color, I think we had tape. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we had tape on there, a different kind of tape that we were playing with. And the background color seeped under the tape a little bit. So I could try to lift that. And I'll try it with this brush first. And that did okay. Let's see what this one does. Right here there's, so this would be the same thing if you had color overlapping another color. You would still try your, I usually try the brush that is less abrasive first, and then I go for the one that will give it more pressure if it won't lift it. And sometimes you lift enough or too much color off, and then you might have to adjust the layer below in order to get it back to the color you want. And that might be putting color back over that whole area, or sometimes just putting clear water over that area. So let's see, if I had gone up here and this, maybe this would overlap area was not where I wanted it, or it was too big or something like that. And say I came in here and I tried to lift it back off, but I got it too light. Let me see if I can get it a little lighter here. Okay, so then what it would be is I would either need to try to match this same color and come back and fill that in, or you can, I will use a little bit of my Quin Rose that I have. Oh, actually, let me start with water. Start with clear water. So the first thing you can try is using some clear water and just gently brush the water over that area. And I would fill in the whole petal, even if I don't need to move color in the whole petal. And sometimes, not for this situation because I really lifted the color, but sometimes you'll get enough color around that area that will help fill it back in just by brushing some clear water over it. And if that's not enough, then you can come back in. So now I'm getting some Quin Rose on my brush, and having the water already on the paper, that allows me to just barely dab. I mean, I'm really just touching my brush to the paper, and that helped fill in that lighter area. Now this would have to dry, and then I would have to see if I've made that adjustment, if it worked. I actually brought some clear water over an area I didn't want it. So if it is still damp and you can dab it up with a towel, then sometimes you can adjust. But this piece had to be dry in order for me to dry that little bit of color that came over the edge there. Okay, so that's another thing you can do. And then sometimes there are cases where you want to have color overlapping and things that are layered. And so in this case, for the aspen trees, and actually I will show you fix on that trunk in just a second. For the aspen trees, I am going to not use the brush that I had in my hand, but get out a different brush here. I'll probably use some Quin Gold, and since I have the sap green out, I'll just use the New Gamboge, sorry, not Quin Gold, New Gamboge and the sap green. And I've got a first layer on the leaves up here, but I can then come back and overlap and put some texture in there by adding another layer. And I am not trying to be perfect with this. I'm not trying to go exactly where my color was before, because that gives the idea that there are layers to the leaves and it helps give it depth. So that is a reason why sometimes you don't want to have the, you want to have layers overlapping and not necessarily have perfect edges. And then I think I'm close enough in that you can see right here there is, over that edge of the tree trunk, there's a little bit of color that is on the trunk. And so just by coming in with my flat brush, see if there's any others, I can change that edge. And I got a little overlap right here, and so I can lift that. I do not have a lot of staining colors on my palette. I use mostly non-staining, and it's not that you shouldn't use them, but just be aware of the ones that are staining, because that makes a difference on being able to adjust edges. And let's see. All right, so I can do that. Now, just to go back to the beginning page, this is the tree trunk that I did at the very beginning, and the color is almost dry, not quite, but it's dry enough I can go ahead and remove the tape. I will need to dry it though, and I always pull down at an angle, and that will help keep it from tearing. If your paper, some papers don't handle masking tape or masking fluid as well as others, and so it's a really good thing to test them. So I'm going to dry this right quick to make sure it's dry, and then I'll just show you painting in that trunk and trying to use my brush in such a way that I am keeping it from overlapping into the green around it. Alright, so I have dried this area, and now I can go back in and put some color on the trunk of the tree. And I am going to do this like it's a light tree trunk, and just put some shadow on one side of it. So I think I'll use cobalt and some of the Quin Rose to make a purpley color for the shadow. And as I come down, it is about taking my time along this right side and just being real careful with my brush. Now, if I go over the edge, I do not try to fix it right then generally. Usually I will let it dry, and then if there is something that needs to be adjusted, like I just went over that edge, then I would come back later and I would lift. If you try to do it while it is still wet, sometimes you end up causing more issues than if you had just left it and come back later. And I'm just going to soften a couple of these edges so that they sort of blur into the light side of the trunk. Okay, so one is to just learn how your particular brush works, and I can show you, let's see, I'll use the sap green because it will stand out. If I take my brush and I put wet color on, obviously if I come up next to an area, I have to let that one dry a little bit. If I come up next to an area that feels slightly cool to the touch, then it's not dry. So let's see, I think, yeah, those are dry, so they don't have a temperature. So if you have an area that you've painted, it looks flat, it looks like it's dry, but you touch it and it's sort of cool to the touch, then I would wait and give it a little more time, or use a blow dryer to dry it a little bit, because if you paint right next to it, you're going to cause the colors to blur into each other. And I know that's not necessarily what this video is about, but it is part of having colors either blend or overlap. And so see, if I come up next to that area that's wet, these two colors are blurring together. Alright, so the last one is I will pull out a painting that I used as a demonstration, and let me switch out my boards here, and then I need to zoom out just a little bit, so I will zoom out and I'll be right back. So this is a part of a demonstration painting that I did for a workshop that I was teaching on painting close-up flowers, and we did a columbine, and you can see over here I still have a couple of the leaves from the plant that I had not put any color on, and those were protected with masking tape. And I also had masked the main parts of the flower and then with masking tape, and then I believe I used some masking fluid on these edges for some of the smaller pieces. It's just easier to apply the masking fluid on really small areas. And then we painted the background first, and then I came back in and started demonstrating for the students and showing them how to apply the paint. So if I were adding some layers to this, I would, let's see, I'll go into my sap green and the new gamboge. This is a warm yellow green down here. And if I were coming back over this, it is my brushwork and using some water in places, but you can see with the brush, and this one actually is the Silver Black Velvet number 16, that I can be very careful and get around these edges without much of an issue. And so I'm seeing my pencil line on the paper, and I'm able to come right up next to that pencil line. And you probably don't see it, but I don't want it to be too strong, so I always do my pencil line light enough that it's there and I can see it, but it's not going to show up in my final painting. And so just taking time to practice your brush strokes, and sometimes it's a particular brush that you just need to learn. It also might be just giving yourself time and practice and doing paintings enough that you get enough memory and muscle control in your hand and your eye, because it is a matter of teaching what your eye-hand coordination is, what's happening there. And so really give yourself time to play with those different techniques and try some of these ways of lifting color back if you do have some overlapping areas. And then just know that a lot of the overlaps that I have in paintings, I don't worry about. That as long as they're not in a really important area, or that is just obvious and stands out, I don't worry about little minor overlaps. To me, that's part of the look of watercolor. So I hope this video was helpful, and if you have a question about a watercolor technique or tip or trick, please comment below, and I will work that into my video schedule. And I hope you have a good day. Thanks. Bye.